Was it fate, or a cruel trick of God that sent a storm to guide her straight into the arms of the man who would change her life forever? The wind came first, howling across the endless white plains of Wyoming, dragging with it a promise of misery. Then came the snow, not soft and pretty like in a Christmas painting, but fierce, biting, and relentless. The world turned white and wild, and by the time the old wagon of preacher Nathan Harper and his daughter Eliza rolled into Copper Creek, the storm had become a beast. It was November of 1883. Eliza, only 18, huddled beneath her thin wool shawl, her fingers stiff from cold. Her eyes, soft and uncertain, stared out at the small, half-buried town. A handful of wooden buildings crouched together against the wind like frightened cattle. They had come from Nebraska, running from drought, debt, and disappointment. Her father, tall and kind, but worn by years of hardship, had whispered that Copper Creek would be a new beginning, a place where a man of God could start again, and his daughter might find peace. But as the snow stung her face and the horses strained against the gale, Eliza couldn't help but feel that this lonely outpost looked more like an ending than a beginning. "We're here, Eliza girl," her father said hoarsely, his breath fogging the air. His hands trembled as he guided the reins. Nathan Harper's voice still held the tone of faith, but behind it was something darker. Exhaustion. They found shelter at the only boarding house in town, run by Mrs. Quinn, a stern widow whose sharp eyes missed nothing. The room she offered was barely more than a cupboard with 2 narrow cots, but it had walls and a fire, and that was enough. The smell of wet wool, bacon grease, and stale coffee filled the common room. Eliza stood quietly by the stove, thawing her frozen hands while her father counted out what little money they had left. Every coin he gave away was a cut to the bone. That night, Copper Creek slept under a thick white blanket. But not all its secrets were buried. Later, sent to fetch a bucket of water from the well behind the boarding house, Eliza wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped into the night. The storm had eased, but the cold still bit like a wolf's teeth. As she passed the saloon, its doors swung open, and a burst of yellow lamplight spilled onto the snow. From within came laughter, the scrape of chairs, and the harsh sound of men's voices. Then 2 figures stepped into the alley beside her, one short and thick around the middle, the other tall and sharply dressed. The first she recognized by his badge, Deputy Jeb Crowley. The second man was a stranger, but everything about him, from the cut of his coat to the cruel curve of his mouth, told her he was dangerous. His name, she would learn later, was Silas Blackthorne. Eliza pressed herself into the shadows. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the wind carried their words to her clearly. "The preacher's perfect cover," Blackthorne said in a voice like gravel. "No one suspects a man of God," Crowley grunted. "You sure he'll play his part?" Blackthorne handed him a small leather pouch that jingled softly. "See that he does. The railroad wants this land cleared. Copper Creek needs to learn obedience." When the deputy's glove slipped, Eliza saw something she would never forget. The pouch was stained with a dark, greasy dust. Coal. She didn't know what it meant, but it felt wrong in her bones. By morning, the storm was gone, but something worse took its place. The peace of dawn shattered with shouting and gunfire. Eliza peered through the frosted window and saw riders, masked men, bursting into the general store's warehouse. The Copper Creek boys. They came and went like phantoms, leaving behind splintered doors and fear. And then came a pounding on their own door. Deputy Crowley filled the frame, flanked by 2 men. His tone was smooth and false, like a snake oil salesman, Nathan Harper. "You're under arrest for aiding and abetting the robbery of the general store." Her father's face went pale. "That's impossible. We just arrived yesterday." Crowley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "A witness says otherwise." Eliza stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He's innocent." "He—" "Quiet, miss," Crowley interrupted, his gaze lingering on her longer than it should have. "Newcomers bring trouble." He motioned to his men. "Take him." They dragged Nathan Harper out into the freezing morning as Eliza cried out for mercy, but the townsfolk turned their faces away. No one wanted to cross Blackthorn's shadow. That night, Eliza sat alone in the cold common room, the fire crackling weakly. Her heart felt like stone. Then, a quiet voice spoke from the corner. "They will not help you." Eliza turned. An older woman with silver hair and deep, wise eyes sat mending a saddle blanket. It was Donna Rosa, the housekeeper from the big ranch north of town, the Triple R. "The law here belongs to Silas Blackthorn," Donna Rosa said softly. "But there is one man who does not bow to him." "Ethan McCrae." Eliza frowned. The rancher Donna Rosa nodded. "He is a hard man, but a just one. Go to him. Tell him what you saw. Tell him I sent you outside." The storm had started again. The thought of crossing that frozen wilderness alone filled Eliza with dread, but the fire of desperation burned hotter than her fear. Wrapping herself in her shawl, she stepped into the white night. The wind howled like a living thing. The snow blinded her, whipped her hair into her face, stung her skin raw. She fell, rose, and fell again, driven by only one thought: saving her father. Her legs were numb, her breath ragged, her will fading. Then, through the blur of white, she saw it, a light. A single, flickering lantern in the distance. Her feet carried her forward on pure instinct. She stumbled onto a porch, her body trembling uncontrollably. The door opened, spilling warmth into the frozen night. A tall figure stood there, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a face carved by life and silence. He knelt beside her. His voice was deep and steady. "You're safe now." And then, before she could speak, darkness claimed her. She awoke later wrapped in a blanket by a roaring fire. The same man sat beside her, carefully stitching a wound on her shoulder she hadn't even known she had. His hands were rough, but gentle. "You took a bad fall," he said without looking up. "Lie still." Her voice trembled. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he murmured, tying off the thread. Sheltering strangers has cost me. Before Eliza watched him in silence, realizing she had crossed not just a frozen prairie, but the threshold of a man's guarded heart. And his name was Ethan McCrae. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep that it felt sacred. The world outside was buried in white, and the wind had finally lost its voice. Inside Ethan McCrae's ranch house, the fire cracked softly, and warmth filled the air. For 2 days, Eliza drifted in and out of sleep, her body fighting exhaustion and fever. Each time she woke, she saw him, that quiet, broad-shouldered man, moving through the room with calm purpose. He spoke little, but every motion told her something about him. The way he added wood to the fire before stepping out into the cold. The way he checked on her without a word. The way his eyes, when they met hers, held something unreadable. Caution, maybe, or a quiet loneliness. Donna Rosa came and went like a silent guardian angel. "Rest, Nina," she said gently. "You are safe here. For now." When the storm finally broke, the sunlight on the snow was so bright it hurt to look at. Ethan saddled his horse and rode out to check the land. When he returned, his face was carved in stone. He nailed something to the wall near the hearth, a paper that had been pinned to his gate. It was a notice of foreclosure, signed by Deputy Jeb Crowley himself. Ethan's voice was low, tight with anger. "They're not just coming for me," he said. "They're coming for anyone who stands in their way." Eliza watched him from the doorway, her heart twisting. This man had offered her shelter, and now because of her, he was in danger. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but no words came. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Donna Rosa gave Eliza chores to keep her busy, sweeping floors, polishing boots, mending torn shirts. Eliza worked with quiet determination, trying to make herself useful, trying not to think of her father sitting in a cold jail cell. By the 3rd morning, she could no longer bear doing nothing. Donna Rosa handed her a kettle of boiling water. "Take this to the washroom," she said. "Mr. McCrae will want to wash before breakfast." Eliza nodded. She carried the heavy kettle carefully down the hall. The door to the washroom stood slightly ajar. Steam drifted through the crack. She thought he wasn't there. Maybe he had gone to fetch clean clothes. She nudged the door open with her shoulder. "I brought." The words froze on her tongue. The room was filled with warm mist. Through it, she saw him, Ethan McCrae, standing over a wooden basin, his back turned toward her. The morning light poured through the small window, tracing the lines of his shoulders, the powerful muscles of his arms, the faint scars that told a story of old battles and pain. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Time stopped. The sound of the fire, the wind outside, everything disappeared. All that existed was him. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard it hurt. She gasped. A small, helpless sound. Ethan turned instantly. He moved fast for such a large man, spinning around and grabbing a towel. His eyes met hers. Surprised, startled, but not angry. "Just human Miss Harper," he said, his voice low and rough. "If you'd wait outside, the spell broke. I'm sorry," she stammered, her cheeks burning. She turned and fled, nearly spilling the kettle, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She stopped in the hallway, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. Her face was on fire. She had never seen a man like that. Not in strength, not in sorrow. It wasn't sin that made her heart race. It was something deeper, something she didn't understand but couldn't deny. When Ethan emerged minutes later, he was dressed in a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp. He looked as uneasy as she felt. "My apologies," he said quietly. "That latch sticks. I should have warned you. It was my fault," she murmured, staring at the floor. "I should have knocked." Their eyes met for a second, just a second, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was recognition. Two people, both scarred by the world, who understood the cost of survival. That morning, as they sat at the table, the silence was different. Not cold, but heavy with awareness. It was Ethan who broke it. "You never told me why your father was arrested." So she told him everything. The journey, the debt, the whispered plot she had overheard between Crowley and Blackthorn. The leather pouch smeared with coal dust. Ethan listened, his face unreadable. When she finished, he picked up an old pocket watch from the mantel. Its glass cracked, its silver casing dented. "Blackthorn works for the railroad," he said at last. "They want this valley. They'll do anything to drive people out." He looked at her, his winter blue eyes sharp. "Your father was framed, Miss Harper. They needed a scapegoat, and a preacher makes a perfect one." "I have to help him," Eliza whispered. "You will," he said firmly, "but not by running blind into their guns." He promised to ride to the next county for help, to speak with a lawyer and the town's doctor, May Calloway, one of the few who dared to stand up to Crowley. Eliza wanted to go with him, but he shook his head. "You'll stay here. It's safer." Days passed, marked by work and worry. Eliza found herself learning the rhythms of ranch life, brushing down horses, hauling water, mending harnesses. Tommy Pike, the stable boy, showed her how to saddle a mare. She was awkward, but determined. One afternoon, Ethan found her struggling to lift a heavy saddle. He stepped in beside her, his presence filling the air. "Here," he said simply, lifting it with one hand and setting it in place. She thanked him softly. He studied her for a moment. "If you're going to live out here," he said, "you'll need to know more than chores. You'll need to protect yourself." He handed her a revolver. The metal was cold in her hands. Her father had always said guns were the devil's tools, but here, under the endless Wyoming sky, they were tools of survival. "Focus on the sight," he said, standing behind her. His voice was calm, steady. "Don't pull the trigger, squeeze it." He adjusted her grip, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch burned through her skin. Her pulse raced, but she listened. The first shot went wide. So did the second. But she didn't stop. His quiet patience guided her. By the end of the lesson, she hit the tin can on the fence post. Once. Then again. When she handed the gun back, their fingers brushed. A spark. Quick. Real. That night, as the firelight danced on the walls, Ethan studied the foreclosure notice again. Something caught his eye. The county seal, the eagle's talon, looked wrong. He fetched an old deed from his desk and laid them side by side. "Look here," he said. Eliza leaned close. The difference was clear. One seal perfect, the other blurred. "It's a forgery," Ethan said quietly, his jaw tightening. "They're faking documents, stealing land, including mine." He looked up at her, his decision made. "We're going to town tomorrow. I'll post your father's bond myself." Eliza stared at him, her heart full. He was risking everything for her, his land, his life, his peace. She had come to him as a helpless girl. But that night, as she watched him stand tall in the firelight, she realized something had changed. She wasn't helpless anymore. And she wasn't just fighting for her father now. She was fighting for him too. When Ethan McCrae made a promise, he kept it. But that morning, as the sun broke over the snow-covered hills of Wyoming, even he knew that what he was about to do might cost him everything. He saddled his horse in silence while Eliza waited by the porch, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The world felt still, like the calm before a storm. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke. The smell of change. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. Ethan gave a single nod. "If we let men like Blackthorn and Crowley rule this valley, there won't be a future for anyone. Not for your father. Not for me. Not for you." Those last words hung between them. Neither dared to speak more. They rode into Copper Creek under a pale winter sun. The townsfolk watched in silence as Ethan dismounted and walked into the sheriff's office. Crowley sat behind the desk, feet propped up, a smirk already forming when he saw them. "Well, well. The mighty Ethan McCrae graces us with his presence." He drawled, "Come to pay your taxes or to surrender your land." Ethan's tone was calm, but his words carried steel. "I'm here to post bond for Nathan Harper, and I'll be standing as his guarantor." Crowley's smirk faltered. "You can't." "I can," Ethan interrupted, "and I will." The deputy's eyes darkened. He leaned forward, voice low. "You're playing a dangerous game, McCrae. You don't know who you're up against." "Oh, I know," Ethan said, his jaw tight. "A coward hiding behind forged papers and bought lawmen." Quote. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Crowley's hand twitched toward his holster, but Ethan didn't move. His icy gaze held the deputy still until, finally, Crowley leaned back and gave a forced laugh. "Fine. Have it your way, but I reckon you'll regret it." By evening, Nathan Harper was free, pale and coughing but alive. Eliza ran to him, tears streaking her face. Her father held her close, whispering a prayer of gratitude. Ethan stood nearby, silent, his expression unreadable. But in his eyes flickered something soft and rare. They returned to the ranch that night with a sense of fragile victory. But dawn brought new dread. Tommy, the stable boy, came riding hard up the lane, his face white with fear. "Mr. McCrae." He shouted. "Blackthorn's posted notices all over town. He's holding an auction in 2 weeks. Sellin' every foreclosed ranch, includin' yours and the Harpers. Claim." Ethan's expression turned to iron. "So that's his next move." He said quietly, "He means to take it all." For days they planned. Ethan pored over the forged documents, searching for any flaw that could expose the corruption. Eliza helped, copying down every date, every signature, her hands shaking from exhaustion. At night, she sat by the fire, her father asleep nearby, and thought of what their lives had become, the preacher's daughter and the rancher standing against an empire. And beneath her fear was something else. A growing warmth every time Ethan's voice filled the room, every time his gaze lingered on her a moment too long. One evening she found him sitting by the hearth, the cracked pocket watch turning slowly in his fingers. He didn't hear her at first. The firelight painted his face in gold and shadow. "Was it hers?" she asked quietly. He looked up, startled. "What?" "The watch." "It belonged to someone you loved." Ethan hesitated. "My wife," he said finally, his voice rough. "She died. Years ago. I was away on a scouting job. Bandits hit the ranch. I came back too late." He looked into the flames, his eyes distant. "I swore I'd never open my door to anyone again. Then you showed up in a blizzard." Eliza's throat tightened. "And now," she whispered. He met her gaze. "Now I reckon I don't have much of a choice." The next morning, they rode out to the old bridge at Miller's Creek, following the trail of coal dust Eliza had seen that first night. The air was bitterly cold, and the ground still frozen in places. When they reached the bridge, Ethan dismounted and crouched to examine the muddy ruts or wagon. He muttered, "Heavy load. This is it. Blackthorn's been moving his mine shipments through here, off the books." They followed the trail west, into the foothills, until they came upon a rough camp. Dozens of laborers toiled under the watchful eyes of armed men, Blackthorn's men. Near the edge of the camp, a small, wiry worker was being beaten by two foremen. "You saw nothing, O'Connell." One growled, "Keep your mouth shut about the night runs, or you'll end up buried under the tracks." Ethan didn't hesitate. He strode forward and seized the man's wrist mid-swing. The foreman turned, startled, and found himself staring into Ethan McCrae's cold blue eyes. "I believe the man was finished speaking," Ethan said, his voice calm but deadly. The foreman backed off. The beaten man, Liam O'Connell, spat blood into the dirt. "They're falsifying ledgers," he said weakly, forging invoices for shipments that never existed. "Blackthorn's robbing the railroad blind." Ethan helped him to his feet. "You'll come with us," he said. "You're a witness now." Quote, "That night, as they sheltered in a small canyon, a storm rolled in, not snow this time, but dust, a choking, howling wall of brown that blotted out the stars. They huddled around a small fire under a rock ledge, the wind shrieking outside." Eliza sat opposite Ethan, watching the firelight dance across his face. He was silent, lost in thought, his revolver resting within reach. "You're not afraid, are you?" he said. Finally. "I am," she answered softly. "But my father once said courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what must be done despite it." He looked at her across the flames. "You've got more courage than most men I've known." They kept watch in turns. When it was hers, Eliza found herself studying him as he slept. The lines on his face, the scars that life had carved into his skin, the quiet strength that drew her like a flame. At dawn, they set out again and rode straight into an ambush. Rifle fire cracked through the canyon. Bullets ripped into the rocks around them. The Copper Creek boys had been waiting. "Get Liam to cover!" Ethan shouted, spinning his horse. He fired twice, driving the attackers back. One outlaw charged straight at him. Ethan fired again, missed, and dove behind a boulder. From her hiding place, Eliza saw another man take aim at Ethan's back. Her blood went cold. There was no time to think. She raised her revolver, steadying her breath as Ethan had taught her. "Focus on the sight," she whispered. "Squeeze. Don't pull." The shot rang out. It struck the rock above the outlaw's head, showering him with stone. His horse reared, throwing him. Ethan turned, fired, and silence fell. When it was over, he walked toward her through the dust and smoke. His face was unreadable. He stopped just a few feet away. "I trust you," he said quietly. "Not just because you saved me." Their eyes met. For a long, electric moment, neither looked away. The world around them, the blood, the dust, the danger, disappeared. All that remained was the heartbeat between them, steady and true. That night, back at the ranch, the fire crackled as Ethan tended his wounded side. Eliza sat beside him, wrapping the last of the clean bandages around his ribs. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, her breath catching each time his skin brushed hers. "Why did you risk yourself for me?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I couldn't stand to lose you," she answered. her words barely above a whisper. He reached out and caught her hand, holding it against his chest. His heart was pounding beneath her palm, strong, sure, alive. And as she listened to its rhythm, she realized that her own heart had been keeping time with his all along. It beat not for safety, nor duty, nor fear. It beat only for him.